Good afternoon. I'm Chief Tom Hackney, Chief Detective with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Give you some additional information that we have from this morning's officer-involved shooting. To recap, at 3:20 this morning, two officers that were working the Zone 2 Arlington area observed a vehicle with the brake lights out. One of the officers initiated a traffic stop and immediately called for backup. The second officer was nearby and quickly arrived with the first officer who made the traffic stop. The first officer approaches the driver, engages him in conversation, gets his driver's license, tells him what the violation's for. The backup officer, the second officer, goes to the passenger side of the vehicle, engages him in conversation, gets his identification. The officer, at that point in time, it's a fairly standard traffic stop. The second officer on the passenger, dealing with the passenger, goes back to his vehicle and is checking his identification, checking the name which he gave him. While he was at his car, the passenger door of the vehicle opened up, and the subject that was in the passenger seat fled on foot from the intersection of Jasper Avenue and Arlington Road, 1 block up to India Avenue and Arlington Road. The backup officer, who was on foot, pursued him on foot, chased him to a front yard at that location. The first primary officer who was in his car drove his police vehicle to that same intersection, got out. The officer who was on foot was able to tackle the suspect, and a fight ensued between the subject and the officers. The subject was very combative, was not complying with orders, was resisting him actively, their attempts to try to subdue him. During this course of them being tied up and engaged in this struggle and fight, the subject was able to kind of break loose. He sat up, and as he sat up, he produced a firearm from what we believe to be his waistband area. The subject began firing at the officers. He fired at least 4 times at the officers in the course of him producing this gun. And this also was him emptying the gun. The gun only had 4 rounds in it, so he used every round that he had shooting at these officers. In the course of all this, and this is an active thing that went on very quickly, the officers returned fire at the subject. One officer shot 6 times, the other shot 5 times. That subject was struck multiple times in the torso area. Fire rescue was called to the scene. Fire rescue announced him dead. The 2 officers that were involved were not injured during the altercation or the shooting, thankfully. We had 2 houses that were struck from the gunfire. Not able to determine if this gunfire was either from the subject or the officers. That's part of what we'll look into in the investigation as it moves forward, but as it stands today now, not able to determine whose gun those fires came from. This was a .45 caliber Taurus semi-automatic pistol that you'll see here pictured to my left that the subject produced. These officers have been placed on administrative leave, which is standard per our policy in a situation of this nature. Our suspect is identified as 23-year-old John Dawson Parker. Parker has a history of robbery arrests, robbery convictions, robbery, drugs, theft charges. He is also a certified 103rd Street gang member. The suspect is, in addition to this, he's a son of one of our active duty JSO corrections officers. The 2 officers that were involved in this case were 8-year veteran Officer Craig Suchek and 5-year veteran Officer Rudy Hathaway. I can answer a few questions if anybody has in reference to it.
Did Parker have any active warrants?
Parker was not actively wanted. The vehicle in which he was a passenger in after he fled, we found what we suspect to be drugs in the vehicle in the location where he was sitting. So it may have been his reason for fleeing the vehicle.
So is that the reason why the person stopped to pick him up? Was it maybe a drug deal was en route?
No, this actually, it appears that the subject who was the driver of this vehicle was taking the friend home for another friend. He went from the area of Edenfield, which is on the University Boulevard North, out to the King's End on Arlington Expressway. While he was there dropping the person that he knew off, the person that he dropped off said, "Hey, this is my buddy, who's the suspect Parker. Can you run him home?" And he's like, "Well, I've never met him before. Hey, please do me a favor." So our driver of the vehicle agreed to do it, and had only met him from the location of King's End to where the actual shooting occurred. He didn't know him by name or anything other than just the guy that he had done a favor for another guy. So we don't believe him to be involved in any way in drugs or anything else. He was cited for the brake light violation. He didn't have his license on him. He was also a traffic citation for that and released. He was very cooperative with us throughout the entire investigation.
How do you deal with a situation like this where the subject is related to a Jacksonville Sheriff's officer?
JSO operates as a very large family. It is one of our own who's hurt with this. Obviously, it's a sad situation. The officers, there's not an officer on this agency who sets out the day that they use deadly force to do so. It's not something that is relished to do. It's something that's an inherent part of what we do. I mentioned this morning that routine traffic stops. That phrase gets thrown around quite a bit. This, for all intents and purposes, would have been looked at as a routine traffic stop. And here's a situation within minutes after this said routine traffic stop that the subject who is involved in this is opening fire and attempting to take your life. So when that situation turns into a child or a son of one of our JSO employees, it hits home. But again, this is a dangerous job. This sort of thing certainly highlights that.
On top of that, were the officers both wearing vests?
Both officers were wearing their vests. I hate to think what a fully loaded gun may have done in this case. He expended all 4 rounds that he had in the gun with no attempts to stop. So thankfully, he only had 4 rounds in the gun. If he had had more, it could have been a worse outcome.
And he's basically really close contact with these officers and still does not hit either of them?
He does not hit either of the officers.
Are they like actually wrestling?
They are, at the point in time, they are wrestling. Both officers are working to subdue him, to get him in handcuffs, to get him under control. Again, the person who was in charge of this entire thing was Parker. All he had to do was, first of all, not run, cooperate with the officers when they told him to stop. He could have done it, certainly not carry the gun, not pull the gun, not fire the gun. He placed these officers in a situation that forced them to use deadly force.
So JSO and Parker both were shooting at each other very close range, like within a matter of
Keep in mind,
inches.
this is a very dynamic thing which happens in a matter of seconds. To be able to say what sequence those shots happen, I'm not able to do.
So about what distance would you put suspect
Within
in
a couple
officers?
to a few feet as this goes on.
3 to 5 to 10?
I'd say no more than 3 to 5 feet.
Okay.
Do we know what kind of drugs he was carrying, or what kind of?
Trying to determine that now. We've done a couple field tests on the drugs. That'll be sent off to make a determination as to what exactly it was.
Can you tell us more about the gang, the 103rd Street gang you mentioned?
He is an active member. This is a gang of one of the Jacksonville area gangs. He's not an associate. He's actually considered to be an active member, which means he would claim to be an active member. Would claim to be a member. There's criteria established within Florida statutes that cause us to list him as a gang member, and he was.
Any other questions?
Can you spell the names, or can we get the emails of the officers' names?
That'll be provided for you with their names.
What about the name of the corrections officer and Parker's mother?
I'm going to go ahead and not release that at this point in time.
Any other questions? All right.